BuzzFeed has shocked the entire internet with a story about Donald Trump, a secret report detailing sex adventures in Russia, supposedly caught on video by the Russian intelligence agencies. And major publications such as the New York Times have picked up on this story and expanded this. So, as usual, pretty much everybody is interpreting this story in a way that suits their own agenda. People interpret this whole topic in a way they want to interpret it. So, and most people reporting on this have no idea about how intelligence agencies work and what it all means. BuzzFeed doesn't really care if the story is true because the story gets some attention and clicks. The shameless and often naive Trump fans, the Trump media, they want to debunk this. They want it to be not true. So that's why they say the whole thing is a hoax, the whole thing is a fake. You cannot possibly imagine the Russians trying something like this. The leftists, they want this to be true because then they think they can prevent Donald Trump's presidency. So every faction out there is ignoring stuff that doesn't fit their own view. So let me begin with the very basics about this and about Trump. The U.S. establishment will not let anybody into the White House who has not been an intelligence asset, for years. Usually they want second-generation intelligence assets to go into the White House. So if your daddy has been part of the club, the secret club, then and you join the secret club, then your chances are much more improved to become president or any other important function. So, this is one of the first questions you should ask yourself when there's a presidential candidate or when there's a nominee or when there are several narrowed down possible nominees for one of the major parties in a presidential election. The question of, is this person working for the CIA or any other major U.S. intelligence agency? It's a common question. But strangely enough, the so-called alternative media, which is nothing but a sham these days, alternative media has not really asked that question. They do not want to know, apparently, whether or not Trump is CIA. And Donald and his father, they were ideal candidates for the CIA. They were traveling a lot. They were business people. Donald parties a lot. They meet important people in the U.S. and in foreign countries. There is money streams everywhere, information floating around, and Donald Trump is surrounding himself in his cabinet and was surrounding himself in his transition team and was surrounding himself in his campaign team with powerful insiders from the military, the CFR, and possibly even the Skull&Bones network. And of course, Skull&Bones network created the CIA. And Trump's most important, most trusted people, guys like Paul Manafort or his lawyer Cohen, Carter Page, these guys, they would all be ideal CIA agents, especially Manafort, who worked abroad and was supporting dictators like Yanukovych in Ukraine, the former pro-Russian dictator there. And Manafort has worked in the past for President Bush Sr., who used to be CIA director and who's also a member of Skull&Bones. So especially Manafort would make an ideal CIA agent or an agent for a different U.S. intelligence agency. And even the Russians must know this. Everybody who knows anything must suspect Paul Manafort. And usually the CIA agents, they work in a certain fashion, in a certain way. They get a cover story. They go to foreign countries, and they act like business people or, you know, even sports celebrities or actors and whatever. You know, anybody important or anybody who can get contacts and party with people, right? Anybody who has a company with money streams and products being moved around, you know, all these people make perfect CIA agent covers. And so these agents are sent abroad. They make contact with people, they listen, they do missions, and they also recruit new people as assets, and so on and so forth. So that's just how this works. And so Russia, of course, as a target country is a different kind of story, a different kind of case. You can't do the normal thing, right? You can't just create a fake persona, you know, a Mr. John Smith who is a businessman, you know, who goes into these foreign countries and has an import-export company. You know, it's just kind of like the James Bond movies, you know, where they always have this import-export company supplying James Bond with weapons and other stuff. So it doesn't really work with Russia because Russia is a closed society. It's total dictatorship, an open dictatorship. So you cannot send your John Smith agents to Russia and expect them to do intelligence work. It doesn't work like this because Russia has so many agents and Russia has so many assets in their own country. They used to have way too many in the KGB. Meaning anybody of any importance coming into Russia can be surveilled 24/7. No problem at all. So the CIA and other intelligence agencies, they need to employ a different strategy, a different tactic to work in Russia. The CIA, they build up their agents and they cultivate these agents. And these agents, they play, they act like they're friends of Russia, or they're just greedy business people who don't care, you know, who they make deals with and all the human rights violations in Russia and the wars and all that. So these agents, they play a stereotype, they play a cliche, they play exactly they play exactly what Russians think of Americans, and Russians think of American business people: dumb, arrogant, stupid, uneducated, greedy, just looking, you know, short-sightedly towards the next payoff, and or, you know, in case of politicians, who are politicians just looking for looking towards the next election cycle. So these agents, they play the role which the Russians expect, and CIA builds up these agents, cultivates these agents, these real business people. They act friendly towards Russia. They make deals with Russians. They travel to Russia. And at some point, these CIA agents will be, these CIA agents in Russia will be contacted by Russian intelligence, you know, in the business world, business meetings or partying or just going out for dinner or whatever, or parties in some important places. So there's a contact phase. Then they do a background check, and then they try to recruit these Americans who are secretly CIA. And so one of the recruitment methods is with prostitutes. This is one of the oldest tricks, right? So these foreigners, these Americans, are invited to sex parties, or they are being you know, hooked up with hookers in their lavish hotel suites to have wild and dirty sex and so on, while being filmed by Russian intelligence with the video cameras. So that's kind of what the CIA is thinking, what other foreign intelligence agencies are thinking. They want to send their people into Russia, and they want them to be recruited by the Russians. They want their agents to have sex, you know, and being filmed and being blackmailed by the Russians, right? So you can create a double agent. So the Russians recruit these Americans, and the Russians think they have these Americans under their thumb. You know, they control them. And for example, here in Germany, the Bavarian Prime Minister Franz Josef Strauß, according to intelligence files from the East and the West, he was recruited in World War II by the predecessor to the CIA, the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And so in post-war Germany, Strauss had a fabulous political career. And the CIA was building up the Bavarian Conservative Mainstream Party, the CSU, the Christian the Christian conservatives. So it made absolute sense for the Americans to maintain this control over Bavaria forever, indefinitely. So Bavaria, probably because the Americans wanted it to be that way, Bavaria became an important trading partner for Russia. And the current Prime Minister of Bavaria, Horst Seehofer, he even traveled to Russia during the tensions and during the sanctions. He traveled to Russia and he called for more trade and lifting the sanctions. So he's playing the role of the Russian friend. And of course, the more trade between Bavaria and Russia, the more insight and contacts there will be for the CIA. So I would be personally very surprised if Trump and his closest people, like his lawyer Cohen and Paul Manafort, of course they distanced themselves from each other, Paul Manafort and Carter Page, I would be surprised if these guys, personally, I would be surprised if these guys didn't work for the CIA. I mean, can you imagine somebody like Paul Manafort, who worked for George Bush Sr., the former CIA director, and Skull&Bones member? Do you think Paul Manafort can go around in the world making deals with Ukrainian dictators like Yanukovych, former dictators? He can make deals with people like that without the CIA knowing about it and getting onto the action, you know, involving themselves? Can you really believe that? How naive do they expect us to be? And here's another thing. This report that you see on the monitor behind me floated around on the internet, detailing alleged sex adventures of Trump in a Russian luxury hotel. When these sex parties supposedly happened, it was in 2013, and in the years before, while Trump was on business travel in Russia. This was before 2014, before everything changed, right? Before 2014 and the Ukrainian crisis, the Russians were considered the partners and the darlings, and Western politics, Western media, Western mainstream media, they were all covering for the Russians. They were burying incidents like the Smolensk plane crash in 2010 that wiped out the Polish elite. So this was at a time when lots of business people in the West, lots of politicians in the West were encouraged to have more relations with the Russians, to party with them, to make deals with them. Energy companies, you know, powerful Western energy companies, they were having these lavish parties with their Russian friends, political insiders and managers. They were all having fun with the Russians, and they were encouraged to do so. For example, the top manager and Rothschild's confidant Klaus Mangold, he was advertising for years for a free trade zone between the European Union and Russia. And then you had the European Union chief, Van Rompuy, the guy who was selected by Bilderberg, basically. He was saying the same thing, right? More trade, more trade. Get in bed with get into bed with the Russians. So Trump, he perfectly played the role of the cliche. He was a cliche. He was the flesh and blood cliche, the kind of thing the Russians expect, how the Russians view Americans. You know, naive, brash, arrogant, greedy, short-sighted, right? But probably Trump didn't walk into the trap of the Russians. The Russians walked into the trap of the CIA. And for decades, ever since its inception, the CIA made an effort, steered from the top. The CIA made an effort to appear incompetent. So, for example, if you read one of the standard books on the CIA by Mr. Weiner, it's a very thick book and, very thin paper and lots of text, really small type font. If you read all of this, you're just shaking your head. For decades and decades, CIA operations have failed and failed and failed and failed, especially during the Cold War. And, of course, you had the occasional success that became public, but mostly everything that went public, that became public knowledge, was a failure or something shocking like MK Ultra. So, and the CIA got infiltrated, and the CIA was hunting Russian traitors and Russian agents. They were infiltrating the whole, United States and so on. So the CIA and the people above the CIA, kind of the Skull and Bones level, they let the Russians believe that the Russians had the upper hand in the intelligence game. And so if you conduct a long con, if you conduct a long-term deception mission, deception strategy, if that is long enough, and of course it makes it more expensive because you have to sacrifice missions and sacrifice agents to make the Russians believe what you want them to believe. If you do that, then of course you can sell any phony intel to the Russians. That's how this game is played, and of course it's about who has more money. You have your more money, you can make longer term deception missions. So, Trump, of course, is calling this fake news. No, he was not with these sex parties in Russia. No. This is just fake news and a plot to sabotage his presidency. And, of course, Trump's mouthpieces like Alex Jones are repeating the same narrative. So, on the one hand, Trump is known for his sex drive and his adventures and his partying. And, of course, the Russians are known for their blackmail operations involving prostitutes. But on the other hand, Trump is a clever professional on the national and international stage. And Trump is no beginner. Trump is no fool. He's not playing the game since last week, right? He never got caught with anything serious. He always knew how to protect himself. And even sports journalists, they were being warned before they went to Russia to cover the Sochi Olympic Winter Games. Even sports journalists were warned to not take any risk whatsoever in Russia. So why would Trump act like a fool? Why would Trump act like a beginner on his trips to Russia? So very unlikely that he would do that, unless, of course, he was instructed to do that. So BuzzFeed gets a lot of attention right now, and so some people, they claim that the famous troll forum 4chan has circulated these sex claims, and this is all just a big joke. But of course, if you read this document, and I have it here, if you read this document, it's a very dry document, just like intelligence reports usually are. It names certain sources, and it covers a lot of stuff. It covers a lot of collaboration between Manafort and Page and the Russians and so on and so forth. And yes, one of these company names was misspelled, but it doesn't look like a cheap, silly fake. And of course, the whole private life of Donald Trump is a very sensitive issue. So you can't just brush this off and say, oh no, I don't want to hear about this. It's not as simple as that, of course. So it's not as simple as, what Alex Jones and others do, just keep praising Trump, just keep denying, anything could be wrong with this guy. keep denying that he's already a traitor, keep denying that, you know, or keep sweet-talking his cabinet choices and so on. You know, just for personal gain or just for popularity or whatever. So, yeah, Trump, he was, Trump is kind of reckless, right? You know that. He talked all this junk during interviews, how hot his own daughter is, and how he grabs women by the pussy and gets away with it. And then, of course, somebody in Hollywood claimed there are recordings, cutting room floor type outtakes from the show The Apprentice, where Trump supposedly uses the N-word and, you know, all kinds of stuff that would ruin his career. So, who has these recordings? There's nothing in this current report that's floating around that the Russians have that. So, maybe somebody has it. Maybe the CIA has that. And so, the report says Putin was disappointed that his influence campaign and the hacks didn't have a greater effect, and was surprised that there was such negative backlash. And Trump, according to this report, Trump is not the guy in control. Rather, his former manager or former trusted guy, Paul Manafort, was running these Eastern contacts. Carter Page was there denying these meetings, being quoted here in the report. So, Paul Manafort, I mean, he would make a great CIA guy, right? He served Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bob Dole, George W. Bush, and John McCain. And Russian cash supposedly was funneled to hackers in Eastern Europe to attack the Democratic Party and, you know, grab some info to use it later. And the backlash was so huge, apparently, that the Russians are backing off. So no more good stuff handed over to WikiLeaks through intermediaries, or nobody else gets some good stuff. They have some more stuff, recordings, intercepted recordings from Hillary Clinton, but nothing, you know, bombshell-ish, right? And then, of course, you have the whole background, the you know, relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted pedophile. And then you had this lawsuit from a person calling themselves Katie Johnson, who claimed that Donald Trump in the 1990s had sex with underage girls trying to become models. The Daily Mail interviewed that woman while her lawyer was present and so on. And so that's this whole background. So obviously, I mean, the alternative media, so-called alternative media, they were talking all day about the Clintons and, you know, Podesta's emails and alleged child sex rings and all that stuff. And of course, influential people have been caught in the past being involved in these sort of things, but of course, with Pizzagate and all that, you know, there was no solid, really hardcore, solid evidence, you know, and despite this, InfoWars and many other places, they were running story after story after story, kind of gray area or even black area type stories, insinuating that, you know, the FBI has all the goods and there might be arrests soon. Clinton's gonna be, or both the Clintons are gonna be arrested and all that. So they were going way too far. They had no solid evidence, and they were going way too far, opening themselves up for lawsuits. While at the same time, all this dirty stuff about Trump was being ignored, even though, you know, at least you had some people going public with some accusations. You had a lawyer being present, and, you know, at least you had something there. And, you know, Trump was known for sexual adventures and, you know, all that stuff. So nobody apparently in the alternative media, or hardly anybody, was willing to go there and to look further and ask some questions. And of course they want to ask the question whether or not Trump and his closest aides are in fact CIA guys. So that's it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. We will of course follow up on this and try to find more things that might connect Trump to the CIA. If you like this video, please comment, subscribe, share this video, and comment below.